Hello fellow acolytes and welcome to another episode of Switch Gems, the series where I look at a variety of different gems for the Nintendo Switch. They could be eShop games or retail games, they could be cheap games or expensive games, they could be hidden games or games that everybody knows about. Hopefully there's something there for everybody. This time we have a nice variety of games and there's some serious crackers in there, so let's not hesitate and we'll just jump straight into it. First up we have a game called No Thing. No Thing is a surreal runner game. You play an office clerk and you need to send an important message to the Queen of Ice. As I say, it's a runner game, so the game automatically makes you proceed further, and all you need to do is press left or right. As you proceed through the levels, there's a percentage. That percentage dictates how much of the level you've actually covered and how far you're away from the exit. Some of the levels work on a cyclical system and you need to go around in laps until you reach 100%, at which point the level will finish. Others last a bit longer and there is an actual exit to find. As you progress through the levels, you'll start moving faster and faster. Every time you turn left or right, you gain a little bit of speed. There are certain cubes you can collect which will slow you down, which are very useful and actually essential at times. But because the respawn of these cubes can be limited on levels that last, you may want to manage the use of them so you have enough for the later laps. Stage 7 in particular, which is one of the harder stages in the game, pretty much requires you using only one of these per lap and managing it very carefully. I mentioned about stage 7 being difficult, and that level is where there is a noticeable difficulty spike in the game. After that point, it pretty much maintains the same level of difficulty until the finale on level 10, and before that it's difficult, but not so difficult. The game is challenging all the way through and you'll probably need to retry all the levels, including the first, until you finally crack them, but with practice you can definitely do the first 6 stages with no problem. It's only that 7th stage where you might start pulling your hair out, which is especially difficult for me because I don't actually have that much hair. The game though is very cheap and the plot is very interesting. There's a voiceover in the background that narrates as you go through. There's also some very good music that plays throughout the levels, and that will keep you in the mood. You actually go into a bit of a trance-like state as you play, and once you beat each level, because of the difficulty, you will be especially relieved once you finish. It feels like a real accomplishment. I would definitely recommend picking up this game, but if you're the type of person that wants to play it through until you reach the end, maybe you'll be frustrated before you reach the end of it. The next game on my list is actually a Neo Geo classic, and that is Mutation Nation. Mutation Nation is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you play as one of 2 dudes and you go through punching mutants to death. It's very much a Streets of Rage type scenario, but all the enemies are various different types of mutants. The enemy and boss designs are very good throughout the game, and they stay interesting enough where you want to keep on playing to see what happens next. The standard enemies range from like wolf type creatures to just sludge monsters. The bosses too are especially epic. You get some really big inventive bosses with some really strange design, but it's strange in a good way. The game's all about beating up mutants, so it fits perfectly. You have your standard attack, you have a punch, you have a jump, you have aerial attacks, but there's also a special power-up system. You can collect certain letters which offer a variety of different special attacks. You hold down the attack button and you can unleash your special attack. Some of these are a bit shit, but some of these can be quite devastating indeed. Personally, I prefer the B special attack, but play around with them and maybe you'll find that you prefer a different one, and they're definitely satisfying to use. It's a nice little approach to the special attack that you usually get in beat-em-ups, and it keeps the game feeling a little bit different to other games in the genre. Being a Neo Geo game, this is an arcade title and as such works on a credit system, but the Switch version actually enables you to add in as many credits as you like, so you can continue the game until you finish it. Hamster also added in some extra functionality to make things a little bit better for people. You can make the game easier or more difficult as you prefer, but to be honest, the difficulty just changes things like enemy health and enemy damage. Nothing too inventive or exciting that doesn't really change the game. But if you find the game too difficult, you can knock the difficulty down. If you find it too easy, you can raise it. The Neo Geo titles are all basically the same amount of money. They cost about £7, and to be honest, for this one, it's worth it. If you like beat 'em ups, which I do, you'll have a good time. The next game on my list is the first of two, which are actually modern retro titles. Anyone that's a fan of the 3D collectathon genre will be fully aware of Ukulele. Ukulele was developed by Platonic, and this is comprised of ex-members of Rareware. These people, as you may know, were responsible for games like Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie and Donkey Kong 64, which were not only pinnacles of the genre, but also considered to be some of the best games of all time. Ukulele is basically the next step in that direction. Banjo-Kazooie had very small, isolated worlds where, for the most part, you could do a world in isolation, get everything you need to do, move on to the next world. Banjo-Tooie had these huge worlds that were interconnected, and you could only complete bits of it at a time. And then as you get further ability, you can get more collectibles and gradually start completing more and more of the earlier levels. Ukulele is basically a happy medium. You have these isolated worlds that aren't connected with each other, but they start off as tiny worlds, which you can explore and do little bits and bats as you learn the level. And then as you get pages, which are the main collectible in the game, you can use those to either unlock new levels or to expand the existing ones to quite sizable levels. Once the levels are expanded, they're at a size which rivals the likes of Super Mario Odyssey. The game is a traditional Rareware kind of style where you have annoying babbly voices which have their own sense of charm. You have googly eyes on everything, and you have like a lot of interesting and often crude humour scattered throughout the game. The game has a really fun charm to it. There is a variety of different missions through the game. Some of the missions require you to transform into different objects, and these can lead to some quite inventive pages. My favourite is the transformation from Moody Maze Marsh. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's definitely a very interesting transformation and allows you to do some cool platforming with it. Whilst there are a lot of missions that are quite fun and enjoyable, there are also more than a handful of missions that are quite annoying and obnoxious. These may be because they're not fun, like with the plant mission. It could be because it doesn't control very well, like the minecart missions, or it could just be because it's especially difficult, such as the Rextro level on Capital Casino. That being said, with those disappointing pages aside, the game still is very inventive. The levels are all beautiful to look at and are very fun to play around in. You have like a Mayan foresty, temple-y area. You have a poison marsh, and it builds up to a final level that's an absolute masterpiece. I love the level, from the pages in it, to the aesthetic design, to the music. It's a wonder to play. It's a great finish to the game. There's also a boss in each world, and the bosses are all fun to fight, with the final boss in particular not only increasing in terms of difficulty, but also length. It requires you to use a lot of different moves that you've gained throughout the game, and use the skills you've required in order to take him down. If you're a fan of the genre, then I would definitely say it's worth the asking price. If you're not massively into it, but you like games such as Super Mario Odyssey, and you have an appetite for something similar, then I would say pick up Ukulele, but maybe on a sale. The next game on my list is another new retro game, and this one has actually just been released. It's The Messenger. The Messenger is more or less an 8-bit platformer game in the style of Ninja Gaiden, or Ninja Gaiden, or however you pronounce it, where you control the messenger, and like with No Thing, you have to take a message to the hero in order to sort all the bad shit out. Whilst the main story doesn't seem like anything special, the way the story progresses and builds up is actually surprisingly good. The other characters in the game, such as the shopkeeper and even the bosses, all have their own personalities and weave their way into the story with a lot of surprising depth. The game in fact does actually have a lot more depth than you would initially think. It starts out like a normal kind of ninja action game, which is centered upon a gimmick of cloud stepping. Cloud stepping enables you to double jump when you attack a projectile or an enemy, and this allows for some interesting platforming. Later you get some other pickups, like a grappling rope that pulls you towards things, which also helps build on the platforming and allows them to include some interesting and challenging gimmicks for you to overcome. As you progress through the levels, the game throws different obstacles at you and shows quite a fair degree of imagination from the actual levels to the bosses, and then the game changes. It goes from being an 8-bit platformer to a 16-bit platformer. It introduces a time travel mechanic, which you may have seen on the trailers, and push you into a 16-bit world. Don't let the trailers fool you though, because the game is essentially an 8-bit platformer for quite a long time, and then it becomes a 16-bit platformer. You may be wondering what the deal is with that, because in the trailer you can clearly see the messenger flicking backwards and forwards between 8 and 16-bit realities. Well, that is because there is a further change in the game. Later on, when you have the ability to flick backwards and forwards between 8 and 16-bit realities, the game becomes less like an action platformer like Ninja Gaiden and becomes a Metroidvania title. You use both the abilities that you've acquired as you progress through the game and also the time travel mechanic to progress through to previous areas and explore sections that were previously unreachable. It's quite a nice twist in the formula and it fits in the game perfectly. The game is very difficult and it feels like the standard platforming levels are more or less a tutorial. It's essentially tasking you to get good at all the different levels and different areas, and then when everything becomes connected and you can explore it a bit more freely, then you can go through the areas with less fear of dying. Not only because you're upgraded, but also because you're familiar with the types of obstacles that each level has and how to overcome them. The game continues to throw in new things as it progresses, and it really is a treat to play. The music too is also worth mentioning because the music is fantastic throughout and is some of the best 8 and 16-bit music that I've ever heard. Not only is the Messenger a gem, but I'd say it's one of the best eShop titles that are actually available on the Switch at the moment. The final game on my list, and the one that gains my biggest recommendation this month, is Splatoon 2. Now, Splatoon 2 is a game that I was very apprehensive of buying. As you may be aware if you're following the channel, I'm not particularly one for multiplayer games. I prefer a solo experience, and when it comes to multiplayer, what I like is generally pretty limited. Things like team-based multiplayer just isn't for me. The Splatoon games, both the first on the Wii U and the second one, are highly publicised as being the big multiplayer games for the Nintendo consoles. So much so, in fact, that the single player barely ever gets a mention, seemingly with multiplayer being the primary focus. However, the game has recently been on quite a substantial sale, and I managed to pick it up, for quite cheap. I was interested in playing it because even though I don't have any desire to play multiplayer, I was very much interested in the concept of the game and wanted to try out the single player to see if it was any good. Was it good? It was absolutely amazing. The single player sort of feels like a reverse Super Mario Sunshine. Instead of using a spray to clean things up, you're actually spraying and causing a mess. Some of the moves as well kind of feel akin to how you would move in Super Mario Sunshine. For example, spraying in front will create a long line of goop, which you can then use the left trigger to transform into a squid and travel at higher speeds and get a longer jump. This pretty much mirrors the sliding in water that Mario could do in that game. The game has a variety of different levels which you play through. These are platforming levels that you work your way through with the end goal of finding a zapfish at the end. The zapfishes are basically just collectibles which signify the end of the stage, and once you beat all of them you can then proceed on to the boss. Each stage offers a new gimmick which either requires new platforming or it requires a new weapon. It gets you doing new things each time, and the whole game just feels very fresh as you proceed through. It's surprisingly inventive and always keeps you interested and entertained as you play through. The bosses as well are a highlight of the game, and again they're very inventive. To say this is just a multiplayer title, you'd think that any kind of single player would be quite minimal and just act as training for the multiplayer, which I suppose it does in a way, but it also works as well as a standalone platforming experience that is quite enjoyable if you like platformers. The aesthetic of the game too is absolutely beautiful. Both the look and sound of the game is amazing. I love the music to it, and I often play the soundtrack just to listen to. It's really funky music and is something that is genuinely good to listen to when you're not playing the game. I would say that even if you're not interested in multiplayer, Splatoon 2 is a must-buy. Now, before I finish with Splatoon 2, I suppose I best cover the multiplayer at least. You'll probably find that any review of Splatoon 2 will primarily focus on the multiplayer, so there's nothing really much I can add. The multiplayer itself is fine, it's enjoyable. It centers around trying to cover the most area in ink and makes a nice change from just your standard deathmatch where you're killing people. It's a neat little concept, but it can be annoying that the range of stages that you can play are limited to 2. There are 2 different stages that are available as you play, and that rotates to 2 different stages. If the 2 stages that are on offer you don't like, then unfortunately it's tough luck. I'm not sure why they did this system, but thankfully all the stages I've played have been enjoyable, so I don't suppose it really matters too much. There's also another mode called Salmon Run. The Salmon Run offers a rotation system like with the multiplayer. However, in between rotations, there's quite a lengthy period of time where it's closed and you can't play it. For what reason, you may ask? For no reason is the answer. For no reason other than just because. It's something that apparently Splatoon players don't really care for, and I can understand why. I didn't play Salmon Run until one of my friends could actually play at the same time, Stephen from the podcast, and when we wanted to play, we were met with a closed door. It's something that's a really bizarre design choice, and I have no idea why they decided to do it, but it's what it is. Thankfully, when you play Salmon Run, it is actually quite fun to play. You and your friend work cooperatively to take out the computer-controlled opponents on a wave-based system. It's essentially horde mode, which you may be familiar with from other games, but it's still fun. All in all, the game is definitely worth picking up. You may want to wait for a sale if you're just picking up for single player, but if you're going to have any interest in playing multiplayer at all, then I would say that the full price is definitely worth it regardless. The game is definitely a solid recommendation from me. So those are the games that we covered this time. We had No Thing, Mutation Nation, Ukulele, The Messenger, and Splatoon 2. 5 absolutely fantastic games for the Nintendo Switch. Have you played any of these? If so, what do you think of them? Drop a comment down below with your opinion, and if you have any suggestions for other games, put it down in the comments and maybe I'll cover them in a future video. Okay, thanks all for watching. Bye.